Wow, that was it's a real conversation, right? That's a good conversation. Fabulous. So I've just been trying to do a little bit of extemporaneous thinking around today. Some of the things that are sticking with me. Just share a couple minutes before we end and head out for a nice another round of socializing. I was thinking back. I think all of us that have been around the Western energy markets for years and years, or just our personal careers, you sort of sometimes you try to reflect on moments that you're just never going to forget, right? And I remember a moment back in 2013. I was up at BPA. I was working hard with the power pole. We were working on the old MC initiative, kind of an early stage look at EIMs, and we were struggling. And I remember Pat Wrighton from Pacificor called me into his office, and he said, "Hey, I want to share something with you." He said, "Me and the team, Stefan, we've decided to join with the California ISO to establish an energy imbalance market." And I just remember that moment, just feeling kind of this tectonic shift in the dynamics of the West. It was almost like the center of gravity shifted. And I think when I look back to that moment and I think about how we have evolved together on a number of different dimensions in the West over the last 10 years. And certainly the market, we've watched the market evolve tremendously, right? You start out with the energy imbalance market. The EIM itself has evolved quite a bit over the years. It's brought on new functions, we've added new features to it, et cetera. It's brought on tremendous new members. Its footprint has expanded to the point now where it's going to cover just about 80% of the West. And we've also seen it demonstrate the value of wide area coordination and also the desire to take that next evolutionary step into the day-ahead market. And the evolution has really been the theme, and we saw that earlier today, and the level of excitement and I think a sense of the opportunity of taking that next step together, potentially again across a big, wide footprint. We've also seen, of course, the evolution in the governance, right? It started out, governance was not a big part of the thought process initially. Then, of course, we went to establish the EIM governing body, primary authority model. Last year, we shifted into the joint authority structure, which John and Angelina described for us earlier. And now the governance is taking another step into EDAM. And of course, we just heard from Chair Holden and from the other two Chris's, about the desire to see even further evolution in governance. Exactly how that plays out, we don't know yet. But certainly there's an evolutionary spectrum along that front. Resource adequacy has changed a lot. It's kind of interesting. The California RA program has been in place, since the early 2000s. It has had to go through all kinds of different adaptations because of new players, new load-serving entities, changes in policy, radical changes in the resource base, right? You try to figure out the RA components for 4,000 megs of batteries. That's complicated. So the California RA program has evolved a lot. And then, of course, just in the last couple of years, we've seen RAP develop. Originally initially up in the Northwest, now broader footprint. And so we've seen a lot of evolution in resource adequacy, which I think is also going to continue to grow. And I thought the conversation here, and I know for all my colleagues in California, we're working really hard right now in a very complicated environment of how to take that next step with a very sophisticated resource base, but I think there's that sensitivity to interoperability. Transmission, boy, just the attitude around transmission in California, I think has changed a lot in the last couple of years. We know the magnitude of resource that has to come onto the grid. We're going to do, I think Neil said it really clearly. He said, look, we're not incentivized at the ISO to come to the table with expensive transmission solutions, right? We want to come to the table with the most cost-effective, best plan of service we possibly can that leverages distributed resources and non-wires planning, et cetera. But we're going to need significant amounts of transmission to get all these resources on the grid. And I think the evolution of the time step moving from short-term planning to the 20-year outlook, the next 10-year plan, I think is going to be very thought-provoking. And then hearing John and Sarah and Rob's whole panel talking about the importance of the interregional look, and then, of course, at PAC and others, on the cusp of actually getting some real lines built, which is really critical. So there's been a real evolution on the transmission path as well. We've seen our institutions evolve. This has been really interesting. I was thinking, we certainly, having grown up and spent quite a bit of time up in the Northwest, is very interesting to watch the power pool evolve. Back from World War II all the way through its recent incarnations and now into the Western power pool. We've seen the Western Interstate Energy Board evolve. Maury's leadership has really brought a tremendous amount of new focus and really brought the regulatory community together. Of course, that's manifested itself in the BOSSR, which, I just can't tell you how valuable I think the dialogue between the regulators has been. Just seeing Darcy and Letha and Anne and Chair LeVar talking to each other, that's really interesting dynamics, so valuable, right, to building those relationships. And then, of course, the CAISO, right? I mean, we've transformed pretty radically, if you think about it, back from 10 years ago. Not only have we taken on the RC footprint with, first the bifurcation of WEC and then the changes at peak, but now CAISO is the RC for a big chunk of the West, but also operating an energy market that covers a significant fraction of the West and having a huge number of new constituents and partners and folks that we have to communicate and understand their interests. That's been a change both in our physical operational footprint, but also our relationship footprint. And I think that through that, we've seen, and it really came out to me, and this is something I really personally value, and at the ISO, when we think about, our cultural values, and when it comes to, integrity and accountability and service and humility and resilience, right? The willingness to listen to each other and to partner and to drive for win-win solutions. I think that's so important. You're just seeing more of that breaking out. You've just seen the evolution of trust developing in new ways. And we just so deeply value our working relationships, and just having all of you here at our symposium back live, just the energy and the focus, it's incredibly meaningful. And so finally, I think we heard the phrase inflection point used a number of times today. And I think that's really true. I think, on so many different dimensions, but just what we just went through in September was pretty spooky, right? Any of you guys were either here or, Boise, Salt Lake, Vegas. I mean, 116 in Sacramento is not a pleasant phenomenon, right? These huge droughts, the resource challenges, and the recognition of the magnitude of the resource challenge ahead of us here in the years, just the amount of resource we got to get in the grid. Of course, big in California, but everybody else in the West is dealing with versions of the same exact issue, right? And running up against infrastructure and deliverability, and how am I going to get dispatchable capacity in my system? How am I going to deal with these extreme needle peaks? It's a lot of hard questions. But I think that what I really am taking away from today is this, also a sense of the urgency of the moment and a legitimate desire to try to figure out how to put these pieces together into a coherent whole. And we just have, I think, a real spirit of collaboration. And I'm just excited tonight, this evening, go out and just hang out a little bit and just catch up, reflect on the day, and spend some more time together, and just see that there's such a goodwill and a desire to keep evolving and advancing together. I just think that's super cool. And so I thought today was just really touched on a lot of the key issues. So tomorrow, I went through the agenda this morning. We are going to be back at it right in the morning, 7:30 breakfast. I'll kick us off at 9. And then run through the street. I encourage as many of you as you can to stick around. I think the panels tomorrow are going to be really interesting. Get a chance to hear from Rothleader on the summer, a little bit more detail around that. I think the stakeholder customer panel is going to be really informative. And then I'm also super interested to hear, I think we're all trying to figure out, what are the blank spots on the resource map, 5, 10, 15 years from now? How are we going to do all this reliably and affordably and equitably? So I think it's going to be great conversations. But thanks again, to all of you, to the team here today so far. Knock wood, everything seems to be working pretty well, and just deeply appreciative of the energy here in the room and all your participation in these partnerships. So
thank you, everybody, and have a great evening.